Hello, today I will be going over Java lesson 5, which is access modifiers, parameters, and return statements. So, access modifiers basically access modifiers define the accessibility of a certain method, class, or attribute. And so these are the three basically structures in Java where you can use access modifiers for. And so there are two different types of modifiers that you can use. There are a few more, but these are the most important ones, which is public and private. So public means that this particular class or method or attribute is accessible for any class. So if you are in another class, you can easily access this code that's in a different class. And private means that this code is only accessible within this class. If you go to another class and you try to access the code in this particular class, you would not be able to because this code is private. And so basically the syntax for this is that access modifiers comes before everything else. Like you would do for a method, you would do public, void, example method. For a attribute, you would do public int number, something like that. So for example, it would be public string name bliss. So public and private doesn't make much of a difference. It doesn't greatly change your code. You just want to have all the important methods and attributes to be public. That's the main thing. So why don't we try this out? Let's go here and let's just make some private attributes. And then maybe some public methods or private methods. So it doesn't really make a difference here if you use private or public, and in general, it doesn't make much of a difference unless you have multiple classes. And so right now it's pretty hard to show you what's the difference, but just know that if I have multiple classes in this repository, then it wouldn't be able, these other classes would not be able to access this attribute or this method. So that's the main thing. Great, so let's go to return statements. Return statements are used to return a value from a method. So it signifies the end of the method. Once you get to the return statement, the method is over and you cannot execute any code that comes after the return statement. So these values, you also have to define the value for them for these return statements. So the return data type is specified when declaring a function. And so the syntax would be, you'd first have public, then you would have the return type, then you would name the method, and then parentheses, and of course, these curly brackets. And so the return data types, well, first there is void, which we have been using in the past, and void basically says that there is no return value because you don't have to have a return value, but you should when it's necessary. And so return data types can be anything that could be an integer, string, basically any data type. And the syntax for returning a value is you would just type in return and then you type in the value. So for example, here it says public string, which is the return data type, my name, and then I returned this value name, which is bliss. So why don't we try that out? So here, I'm just gonna say private string, and I'm gonna say return. Here I'm gonna make an object. So I'm gonna say, so in order to actually be able to use it, to use these return values or whatever, you need to call the method. So when the method is called, it's now just equal to this value. And you can even assign it to a variable or print it out. So for example, with the function that we had before, we could literally just say var name equals this function. And so then this function equals whatever return value that we had. So this is really useful for when you want to call methods inside of other methods, or when you want to just print it out in the main function. So why don't we try this out? So here, this is how I made an object here. Object is called obj, and then this is how I call a method, right? Because it's obj.myname parentheses. And so right now, this is going to become bliss because that's my return value. So let's print it out to make sure. Yeah, so it prints out bliss. And let's say I want to return a variable. So I want to return name, which is defined up here. I could do that as well. So very simple, right? Because you can have it return whatever variable that's defined. And so you can also have it return attributes. So I'm going to make this attribute as and let's see what it prints out now. Yeah, it prints out name. So what happened here is that when we changed this to name, this value became name. And then this value became name. So that means when you call it, this value is now name, like the word name. So it prints out name. So that's something you can do. So just know that the variables basically equal whatever value is stored inside of them. Great, so now let's move on to parameters. So parameters are a way to pass data or information into a method in the form of variables. And a method can have as many parameters as you want. And these parameters are defined inside of the parentheses of that method. So for example, we've got public, void, and the name of the method. And inside the parentheses is where we have these parameters. So this is one parameter, this is second parameter. And note that you can have as many parameters as you want inside a method, and that each of them has to be separated by a comma. And so these parameters are basically like variables. So it's in the form of variables. So this is basically a variable. And so of course, you should just treat it as a variable. And just note that these variables can be only accessed inside of the method. If you try to use these variables in other methods or in the object or anything like that, it would not work. And you will pass values into these parameters when you call them. So why don't we just try this out? So in here, I'm just going to make another variable. I'm gonna make it a string and call it my. Instead of printing out name, instead of returning name, I'm gonna return my name. Cool. So right now we haven't passed any value into this parameter. So this my name basically equals nothing right now. So in order to change that, we have to figure out how to pass values into parameters. And so you do that basically inside the parentheses when you call the function. So when you call print my name, if you can put a value inside the parentheses. You can also make it you can also pass a variable into parameter. Just make sure that that variable actually has a value. And also you have to make sure that whatever values you pass into the parameter, that data type matches the data type of the parameter. And also make sure that you have given a value for each parameter that is defined in the method. So I'll illustrate more on that here. So here we want, let's say we want the parameter value to be obj.name. So all we have to do is we just have to put that variable here. And see if it still works. Yeah, so obj.name is now, so obj.name equals the word name, and obj.name equals my name. So my name equals the word name, and then we returned my name, so this entire expression equals my name, that variable, which means it also equals name, and so it prints out name. What if we didn't put anything here? What if we didn't give this any value? What do you think would happen? So yeah, so it runs an error. You must make sure that you have passed values into those parameters. What if I had two parameters? I'm going to make another one. I'm going to make this int num. And what if I call this here? And I didn't give both parameters. I only gave a value for my name. Yeah, so here it gives another error because we didn't pass a value into num, so it's not able to comprehend that. So in order to fix that, why don't we put 4? So num has now a value, and then we'll just print out num. See what happens. Yeah, 4 became num, and then the method prints out num, and then it returns this value. And of course, the method ends there. So why don't we try using this in another method, and let's see what else we can do with it. So why don't we make another method? I'm just going to call this. And I'm not going to put any parameters, and I'm just going to make a for loop. And then inside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this method in. And remember, when you call methods inside of other methods and not inside the main method, you can just you don't need to have an object. So I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to pass in for my two parameters. I'm just going to put in a random string here. Then for the second one, for num, I'm going to put in I. And I'm going to put this. What do you think is going to happen? and pause this video for a second and then unpause when you think you know the answer. So now I'm going to call this here. So I'm just going to do and let's run this. Yeah, isn't that cool? So in this for loop, we define this variable I that starts at 0, right? So the first iteration of this loop, I was 0, so it printed out 0. And printed out number because we passed this parameter here, number, and that's what it prints, that's what it returns here. And so then when I became 1, it prints out 1 here. And then it prints out number again because we returned it, returned number, and then it prints out number here. And so it keeps going until I becomes 10 and then it stops. So as you can see here, you can do really cool things with return values, with parameters, and you can have a lot of fun. So that's all I have for you in terms of content, and let's move on to the assignment. So here's the link to the assignment, and basically in the assignment, you're just using access modifiers, parameters, and returning different values. So here it is. So you're just going to define some attributes. You're going to make some parameters. You're going to return a value and then do make another function that uses that return value and does something else with it, and then make a private function that takes in some parameters and then returns something. So that's it for today. Thank you very much and see you the next lesson.